My name is Grace Holloway. The first person who laughed when my sister called me the burden of the family was not a stranger. It was my mother. Her laughter echoed through a room filled with warm, golden light, expensive wine, and perfectly tailored suits. It was soft enough that an outsider might have mistaken it for a harmless joke, but Grace knew better than anyone, because she had been hearing those words for 27 years. The Crawford estate stood on a hill overlooking the Charleston coastline. Its towering white walls reflected the colors of the setting sun. Luxury cars lined the stone driveway leading toward the main entrance. Grace had spent nearly half a day driving to get there. The invitation had not come from her sister. It had not come from her parents either. 3 days earlier, her mother had called. Her voice had been unusually sweet. She said Vanessa wanted the entire family present for the pre-wedding gathering. She said it was important. Grace knew that was not entirely true. In the Holloway family, she only became important when they needed to complete a perfect picture in front of other people. Growing up, Vanessa had always been the center of everything. Vanessa was prettier. Vanessa was more popular. Vanessa always knew how to make people adore her. Grace, on the other hand, was the quiet child. The girl who preferred spending hours in a library instead of attending parties. The one who asked questions nobody wanted to answer. Over time, those differences became distance, and that distance slowly turned into contempt. Grace had learned to accept that a long time ago. She worked as a historical property records researcher for a legal organization in Charleston, a job that required patience, precision, and the ability to notice what everyone else overlooked. But in her family's eyes, it was nothing more than a boring job, not impressive enough to brag about, not impressive enough to make them proud. The moment Grace stepped into the grand ballroom, Vanessa spotted her. Her cream-colored silk dress made her stand out among the crowd like a movie star. Standing beside her was Ethan Crawford, the future heir to one of the state's most prominent real estate empires. Vanessa smiled. A perfect smile. Beautiful. But cold. My sister finally made it. Her voice carried loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Every head turned toward Grace. Vanessa walked over. She slipped her arm through Grace's as if they were incredibly close. Then she turned toward a group of guests who had been chatting nearby. Let me introduce everyone. This is Grace, our family's long-time burden. A few people laughed. A middle-aged woman covered her mouth. A man shook his head with amusement. Then Linda Holloway laughed too. Robert Holloway took a sip of wine as though nothing unusual had happened. Grace could feel dozens of eyes fixed on her. But she did not react. She did not get angry. She did not argue, because she was used to being the target. For years, every time she defended herself, things only became worse. Eventually, she chose silence. The same silence her family mistook for weakness. Vanessa continued telling old stories. Stories twisted just enough to make Grace look pathetic in the eyes of strangers. The crowd kept laughing. No one noticed that an older man standing near the back of the room had stopped talking several minutes earlier. Charles Crawford, Ethan's father, founder of Crawford Holdings. He was staring at Grace, not with polite curiosity, with unusual focus. Vanessa kept going. She researches old paperwork, old records, things nobody really cares about. More laughter followed. But Charles did not laugh. He slowly set his wineglass down. His eyes never left Grace. Grace Holloway. He repeated her name as though trying to remember something. The room gradually fell silent. Charles took another step forward. What exactly do you do now? Grace looked slightly surprised. I research historical property records for the Heritage Justice Foundation. The smile disappeared from Charles's face. So did the color. For the first time that evening, Grace saw worry appear in the eyes of a powerful man. He stared at her for several long seconds. Then he looked at Vanessa. Then at her parents. And finally he said something that left the entire room speechless. I don't think anyone in this room truly knows who Grace is. And in that moment, for the first time in many years, Grace felt that everything was about to change. No one responded immediately after Charles Crawford's words. The music still drifted through the room from somewhere in the distance. Servers continued moving between the tables. But the atmosphere had changed. It felt as though someone had opened an invisible door and allowed a cold wind to sweep inside. Vanessa was the first to recover. She laughed. "Charles, you're making everyone curious. She's just my little sister, a records researcher. Nothing special." Charles did not laugh. He kept looking at Grace. The longer he stared, the more tense his expression became. Grace noticed it, and for the first time that evening, she found herself curious as well. He knew something, or at least he thought he did. "The Heritage Justice Foundation," Charles repeated. "How long have you been working there?" "Almost 2 years," Grace replied. Charles nodded slightly. Then he asked another question. "Are you currently handling any files related to Charleston?" This time, the entire room paid attention. Grace looked at him for a few seconds. "Yes. A few files. I'm not allowed to discuss the details." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. That sounds like a detective movie." Her mother laughed along. She's always liked making everything sound mysterious, but Charles showed no reaction to their comments. Inside his mind, pieces were slowly falling into place. He remembered a meeting from several months earlier. He remembered a name that had appeared in a legal report. He remembered old documents recovered from the state archives. And throughout those pages, one name had appeared again and again: Grace Holloway. The woman standing in front of him. The woman who had just been mocked by her own family as if she were a joke. Across the room, Ethan Crawford was beginning to notice that something was wrong. He stepped closer to his father. "What's going on?" Charles did not answer. Instead, he turned toward Grace. "I heard your team recently completed a review of coastal property ownership records." Grace looked surprised. That information had never been publicly released. "That's correct," she answered briefly. Vanessa folded her arms. "Come on, don't tell me we're going to spend the entire evening talking about old paperwork. Our guests are here to celebrate a wedding, not listen to a history lecture." A few people laughed. But the laughter was weaker this time, because everyone could see that Charles Crawford was not amused. He was worried. Grace noticed the way his fingers tightened around his wine glass. That was not the reaction of a man making polite conversation. That was the reaction of someone who had just seen something he desperately wished he hadn't. Grace thought back over the past several months. The long days spent inside archives, the dusty files, the aging wills, the land surveys dating back decades. At first, it had seemed like an ordinary research project. At least, that was what she believed. But the deeper her team dug, the more irregularities they uncovered. Some properties had vanished from official records. Certain inheritance rights had been altered under suspicious circumstances. Several names had suddenly disappeared from legal documents. Everything suggested that someone had spent years hiding something, a major secret. A secret connected to some of Charleston's wealthiest families, including the Crawford family. Suddenly, Charles spoke. "You found the original records, didn't you?" The room instantly fell silent. Grace looked at him. This time, her expression changed completely, because that was not a question an outsider could ask. He knew about those files. He knew exactly what she was investigating. "Which records?" Grace asked. Charles realized he had said too much. He took a slow breath. But it was already too late. Cracks had begun appearing in his composure. Vanessa frowned. "Dad, what are you all talking about?" No one answered her. Charles kept his eyes on Grace. Then he spoke in a lower voice. "The documents from the 1970s. The files connected to the coastal inheritance claims. You found them, didn't you?" Grace felt her heart sink slightly, because now she understood. He was not guessing. He knew. And that could only mean one thing. The Crawford family was connected to the investigation. The atmosphere inside the room grew heavier. Even the guests who had no idea what was happening could feel that something was wrong. Grace slowly placed her glass on the table. Then she looked directly at Charles. "Yes, I found them." The color immediately drained from Charles's face. A woman standing nearby accidentally dropped the fork she was holding. The metallic sound echoed through the silence. Charles closed his eyes for a few seconds, as if he had just heard the one thing he feared most. When he opened them again, the curiosity was gone. In its place was fear. And at last, Grace understood. The most powerful man in the room had not recognized her because of her name. He recognized her because of the investigation, and whatever she was holding had the power to destroy far more than anyone there could imagine. Then Charles said something that left the entire room speechless. "I think everyone here needs to understand something. What Grace is investigating isn't just history. It has the power to change the future of many people in this room." No one cared about the party anymore. The elegant music continued to flow from speakers hidden in the corners of the room, but no one was listening. Every ounce of attention was now focused on Grace and Charles Crawford. Vanessa noticed it first. A feeling of irritation began creeping into her chest. This was supposed to be her night, the event she had spent months planning, the moment when everyone was supposed to look at her with admiration. Yet now, no one was looking at her at all. They were all looking at Grace, the younger sister she had always considered inferior. Vanessa stepped forward. "I think this has gone far enough." Her voice was sharp. "If this is about work, then discuss it later. There's no need to ruin my party." Charles turned toward her. For the first time in years, Vanessa felt the unsettling realization that a powerful man's attention was no longer on her side. "No one is ruining your party," Charles replied. "The truth is what's ruining it." The room fell completely silent. Grace understood that everything had passed the point of no return. Secrets that had been buried for years were finally rising to the surface, and no one could stop them now. She looked at Charles. "You know about the inheritance records, don't you?" Charles did not answer immediately. The silence lingered for several seconds. But sometimes silence is the clearest answer of all. Grace took a deep breath. Then she turned toward the crowd. "Everyone thinks I'm researching history. That's true. But that's not all. The records my team uncovered show that numerous coastal properties changed ownership through highly questionable transactions over several decades." Several guests exchanged uneasy glances. Grace continued. "Some legitimate heirs disappeared from official records. Certain ownership rights were transferred without complete authorization. Several original documents were replaced with altered copies." Linda Holloway laughed dismissively. "Grace, you're frightening people. This isn't a courtroom." Grace looked at her mother. Her expression was strangely calm. "No, this isn't a courtroom. But one day, someone may very well find themselves standing in one." The smile vanished from Linda's face. Robert Holloway began to feel uneasy. He didn't understand the entire situation, but he understood one thing. His daughter was holding something enormous. Something powerful enough to make Charles Crawford lose his composure, and that had never happened before. Grace reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. No one knew what was on it, yet the simple act made the atmosphere even more tense. "For the past 6 months," she said, "my team has reviewed thousands of pages of archived records, land surveys, banking documents, property transfer agreements, original wills. And we discovered a pattern of discrepancies stretching back more than 40 years. Ethan Crawford frowned. He turned toward his father. "Dad, is this true?" Charles did not answer. He stood motionless. His face looked paler than before. The sight sent a chill through Ethan, because for the first time in his life, he was seeing fear in his father's eyes. Vanessa's patience finally snapped. "Enough. What exactly are you trying to prove? That you're smarter than everyone else?" Grace looked at her sister, and suddenly, countless memories came rushing back. The comparisons, the insults, the moments when her accomplishments were dismissed as meaningless, while every small success Vanessa achieved was celebrated by the entire family. "No," Grace replied. "I simply want everyone to understand that the things you've always believed aren't necessarily the truth." Vanessa laughed. "Then what is the truth?" Grace remained silent for a few seconds. Then she answered, "The truth is that the investigation was completed several weeks ago." The smile disappeared from Vanessa's face. Charles slowly closed his eyes, as though he had just heard a verdict being delivered. "The legal team has already received the full report," Grace continued. "All relevant parties have been notified. At this point, what happens next is no longer under the control of any individual." A man standing near the bar immediately pulled out his phone. Then another. Then several more. Rumors began spreading through the room at remarkable speed. Whispers appeared in every corner. Vanessa felt everything slipping through her fingers. The perfect evening she had dreamed about was beginning to crack apart piece by piece. Ethan looked at his father again, this time with different eyes. The absolute trust was gone. In its place was doubt. "Dad, say something." Charles opened his mouth, but no words came out, because he knew Grace was telling the truth, and he knew something even more frightening. This was only the beginning. Grace slowly looked around the room. She looked at the faces that had laughed at her. She looked at the family who had spent years calling her a burden. Then she realized something. For the first time in her life, those people were no longer looking at her with contempt. They were looking at her with concern. And at the far end of the room, Charles Crawford understood better than anyone else. The storm they had feared had finally arrived, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. 8 weeks after that night, no one in Charleston was talking about Vanessa Holloway's wedding anymore. People were talking about the investigation. They were talking about the records that had been buried for decades. They were talking about a secret that seemed to have disappeared with time. And they were talking about Grace Holloway, the woman who had once been called the burden of the family. The news spread faster than anyone could have imagined. At first, it was only local newspapers, then legal journals picked up the story. Soon afterward, major news outlets began covering it. With every passing week, another piece of the truth came into the light. Several coastal properties became the subject of disputes. Numerous transfer records were re-examined. People began asking questions about what had really happened in the past. Not everyone involved was a criminal. Not everyone had broken the law. But many things had been built upon foundations of truths that had never been told, and now those truths were returning. Like the tide. Slowly. But inevitably, the Crawford family became the center of endless speculation. Several projects were put on hold. Some business partners stepped back temporarily while waiting for the final outcome. Emergency meetings became a regular occurrence. Charles Crawford seemed to age noticeably within just a few short weeks. The man who had once appeared on the covers of business magazines had nearly disappeared from public events. The familiar confidence was gone. The calm smile was gone. Because he understood better than anyone that once the truth had been brought into the light, no one could force it back into the darkness. Ethan Crawford changed more than anyone else. After weeks of reviewing records and examining the facts, he began to realize that the world he had always trusted was not entirely the world he had been told existed. For the first time, cracks appeared in his unquestioning faith in his family, and those cracks continued to grow. Meanwhile, Vanessa Holloway was living through the worst days of her life. She had once believed the wedding would mark the beginning of a perfect future. Instead, that future fell apart far faster than she ever expected. The phone calls became less frequent. The congratulations disappeared. The people who had once worked hard to be close to her began keeping their distance. For the first time in her life, Vanessa understood what it felt like to be left behind. The same feeling Grace had carried for years. One rainy afternoon, Linda Holloway called her daughter. It was the first call she had made since the night at the Crawford estate. Her voice sounded much smaller than before. "Grace, I want to see you." Grace remained silent. On the other end of the line, Linda struggled to continue. For years, she had convinced herself that she was protecting her family. She had believed that favoring Vanessa was justified. She had believed that Grace was strong enough to handle everything on her own, but now she was beginning to understand something painful. Neglect can hurt someone, sometimes even more than harsh words. "I was wrong," Linda said, "maybe wrong about a lot of things." Grace looked out the window at the rain falling beyond the glass. She was not angry. She did not feel victorious. What she felt instead was a deep sadness, because some things, once lost, can never truly return to what they once were. Robert Holloway called as well. He had never been good at expressing his emotions. For most of his life, silence had been his chosen refuge. But this time he said something Grace never thought she would hear. "I'm proud of you." Grace closed her eyes. For years, she had wanted to hear those words. But when they finally arrived, the feeling was not what she had imagined. Because old wounds do not disappear because of a single sentence. They need time, a great deal of time. As for Grace, her life changed in a different way. Not loudly. Not dramatically. She was invited to work on larger projects. People who had once ignored her opinions now sought out her advice. Her colleagues looked at her with respect, not because of what she had exposed, but because of the determination that allowed her to uncover the truth. One morning, as she walked into her office, Grace noticed her name displayed on a new glass door. It was an ordinary moment. There was no applause, no fireworks. Yet it meant more to her than all of those things combined, because it represented years of quiet effort, years of being underestimated, years of moving forward even when no one believed in her. People often think stories like this are about revenge, but they are not. Grace never wanted to destroy anyone's life. What she wanted was the truth. And sometimes the truth is the most powerful force of all, stronger than money, stronger than status, stronger than lies repeated over and over again for years. Her family believed she was a burden. They mistook silence for weakness. They believed that refusing to fight back meant she had no value. But they were wrong. Grace was never silent because she was powerless. She was silent because she was learning, observing, preparing for her own future. And in the end, the thing that changed her life was not anger, it was perseverance. What about you? If your own family looked down on you for years, would you be able to forgive them once they finally realized their mistake? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy emotional family stories, hidden secrets, and powerful moments when karma changes everything, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you can join us for more unforgettable stories ahead.